How are you guys feeling today? Feeling good? Yeah. Hopefully not too drained, too stressed, right? So thank you so much for having me here today. So I like to kind of set the frame for this talk of, one, I'm going to be vulnerable with y'all. So my story is definitely, it is not the traditional story of a 28-year-old. So yes, I'm 28 years old. And so vulnerability, I'm going to really encourage you guys to share and be vulnerable here. And there's typically three kinds of people from my perspective that I see in these talks, right? There's person number one who is not currently experiencing burnout symptoms. However, they're curious. They want to be able to prevent burnout in their lives, and they maybe want to help other people in their lives who are experiencing burnout. So that's person number one. Person number two is somebody who's experiencing burnout symptoms, but they haven't yet connected the dots to, hey, this is actually burnout. Just because there's a lot of like stigmas and a lot of burnout's a really broad term, right? So I guarantee for that person, by the end of this talk, you're gonna know exactly whether or not if you are experiencing burnout or not. And then the third kind of person is the person who knows they're burned out, the person who is really struggling on a daily basis, who feels like they're kind of trudging through mud, and they want instant help, they want instant relief. And no matter what person you are, this talk is designed to help you not only educate you on what burnout is, but also what actually is the underlying causes of it. I want to really help reframe burnout and make sure you guys know it's not a personal character defect. It's not because you're too lazy. It's not because you're not disciplined. It's a sign of something a lot deeper. So with that being said, the way that we're going to go into this, I'm going to do the talk, and then at the end, there's going to be room for questions. And for those of you who are experiencing burnout and who feel like you really want help with that from a personal perspective, then I will give you guys options on how to dive deeper with me after. So without further ado, Brennan Hilleary, my company name is Build Your Power. And I really want to first dive into what burnout looks like in real estate specifically. So we're going to dive into that first. And I'm going to look around the room, so if you guys are nodding your heads in agreement, then I know I nailed it. So feel free to do that if these resonate with you. And as I go through these symptoms, I want you guys to count how many of these symptoms that you are experiencing mentally, because that's going to be important later on. So let's talk about the first one. So maybe saying yes to clients who drain you, you feel like you don't want to work with, because slowing down maybe feels like falling behind, or maybe there's this fear of like, well, if I don't say yes to this person, then where's my next client going to come from? Where's my next business going to come from? So that's a sign. Or just having a hard time saying no in general in your life is another way to look at that. Kind of we overcommit our time to things. Two is just feeling disconnected from friends and family. So physically, you're there with people, but mentally, you're somewhere else. Real quick, because I know this is a big one. How many of you guys feel like when you're with people or in your personal lives, physically you're there, but mentally you're kind of checked into work a little bit? Does that resonate with everybody here? Okay, cool. Next is going to be you feel guilty anytime you're not working. So anytime that you're doing something maybe for you or relaxing, if the chemicals in our body from drinking, right, or doing something like that's not in our body, maybe when we're not drinking, we feel guilty, or when we're not like doing something that kind of alters our state of mind, we feel guilty. It's very common. You keep telling yourself, I'll slow down when, but when never comes. So once this season's over, I'll slow down, right? Or once I close this deal, I'll give myself permission to slow down. But it just seems like there's never really a time where that happens. You wake up tired, even after 8 hours of sleep. So even when you get good sleep, you wake up and you feel like it takes all the willpower you have to get out of bed. Maybe the first thing we do when we get out of bed is check our phone, kind of get in that panic mode of fight or flight. And then from there, we have a quick morning, right? And then that creates a chain reaction of like, okay, I didn't eat breakfast because I woke up too late. And then now I'm frantically going from meeting to meeting. And then now I'm anxious all day. And then at the end of the day, I realize I haven't eaten all day, things like that, right? And then you're always doing things, but never feel like you're doing enough. So you feel like you're always in motion, but you don't always feel like you're making progress. Two very different things, right? So as I asked you guys before, I want you guys to just take a quick mental note of how many of these are you experiencing right now? Because I'm going to give you a perspective in this next slide of where you might be on the burnout curve, right? And this isn't for judgment reasons, right? This is just so you guys can be more aware of maybe what's happening. So give me a thumbs up when you guys have done that mental check-in. Awesome, thank you. Thank you for your participation. All right, so These are really funny and unique names, but so essentially, these are the three kinds of real estate professionals that I've seen, and it doesn't even have to be real estate professionals, just three kinds of high achieving professionals in general. So if you're experiencing 1 to 2 symptoms, then you are the proactive problem solver, which means you're not burned out right now. You may have been before. You want to prevent it from happening or happening again. So kind of like we talked about when I talked about the three kinds of people. 3 to 5 is I call it the worn out winner, which is you're still hitting your goals, but it doesn't feel as satisfying as before. Maybe that spark that you used to feel for your job, you're noticing slowly over time that spark is fading away. So the things that used to light you up maybe don't as much anymore. And the last one is 6, the silent suffering high performer. So you feel exhausted, disconnected, and unfulfilled consistently. You know something needs to change, and the way that you're operating, you know is not sustainable. So keep that in your head. Which one of these guys are you? Because that's going to really help with framing what you can take away from this talk moving forward. And I promised you guys I'm going to get vulnerable, so I want to share with you my story of why I do what I do, because burnout prevention coach is not something you probably hear every day. So it came from personal experience. So I didn't learn something from a book like Kevin mentioned. I learned it from personal experience. So I want to talk to you guys about the journey that shaped my mission. So it all started when I was born. I'm just kidding. So when I was I will talk about my childhood though. So when I was growing up, I went between 2 different households. So both my parents were divorced. So I had one household over here that was super strict. You have to achieve a lot of things, was always like the helicopter parent. And then this household over here, which was very lenient, lackadaisical. I would even call it neglectful, but we won't go there. Yeah, they just weren't really home that much. So I learned from a really young age how to shapeshift. I learned how to change who I am based off the people that I'm around, which is what started developing that people pleaser tendency into me. So I learned that from a young age. And then as I was growing up, you know, I started to build a sense of self in the sense that I started to get along with like some kids in track. I started to do some sports. I started to feel like I really had this sense of community. And it was strange because when I was 15 years old, I had been experiencing some weird symptoms physically that I couldn't really explain. So those symptoms were, I couldn't breathe through my nose for a good 6 months. So it was definitely not just like a common cold thing. I literally couldn't breathe. And then also I was really tired all the time. So no matter how much I would run track practice or how much I would train, how much food I would eat, I just wasn't getting any stronger. And I had this gut feeling that there was something wrong. So because of that gut feeling, my stepmom, my dad, and I went for me to get a CT scan at the doctor's office. And I'll never forget the look on the doctor's face when he came in and told me the results. The doctor said, "I'm so sorry. You have a mass the size of a grapefruit in your face. And you have to be admitted to St. Jude right now." So from the time I was 15 years old, I went from worrying about if the girl in class liked me back to I'm not even sure if I'm going to survive. So from the time I was 15 to the time I was 17, I had about 10 surgeries, 30 plus hospital visits, knocked on death's door a couple of times. And throughout this process, I was also taking pain medication because what I was going through was really painful. And when I was 17 years old, I had this miraculous physical recovery. So I had less than a 25% chance of surviving. And I did. And everybody around me was like, "Man, aren't you so happy? Like, aren't you just so ecstatic that you were able to get through that? Like, aren't you so ready to just go back to being normal?" And in my head, I was like, I should feel happy. Like, I should feel grateful for this. But I was diagnosed with complex PTSD from the experience, you know, and I was very, very depressed after all those surgeries were done. And I'll never forget that because of other people's expectations, because I felt like I had to change who I am based off the people I was around, one day I took a pain pill when I wasn't in pain. Just because all I knew is when I take this pill, I feel better about myself. I can be the person that other people want me to be. And so that led to an addiction to opiates. And so when I was 17 years old, where most people were going to prom, and most people were wrapping up, picking what college they want to go to, I was in rehab for 90 days inpatient. And what ended up happening was when I went to rehab, I connected with myself more than I ever had. So I spent 89 days in a place where you can't really escape from yourself, right? So I connected to this part of me that was the high achiever. I was like, I gotta prove my old self wrong. I gotta build something for myself. I gotta make a name for myself. And that's when I started the pursuit of chasing success. That's when I started to be like, okay, well, doctors told me that I can never really work out extensively again. So naturally, being the rebel child that I've always been, I said, well, I'm just gonna join the Marine Corps. Because that's the exact opposite of what, of what I was told that I could do. And yeah, I started to use this fuel of like this fear of not being good enough, right? This fear of like not being able to accomplish enough, this fear of just not being enough. I started to use that to chase success, right? So I started to see a lot of just success in my life in general. I started my corporate job when I was 19, so I was in the Marine Corps Reserves. I moved all over the country over the course of 7 years with them. I got promotion after promotion after promotion. Didn't go to college, learned all through like hands-on experience. And while this was amazing in the beginning, what started to happen a few years into it is I started noticing some things. I started noticing a lot of exhaustion, started noticing that like if I wasn't working, I would feel anxious. And instead of really confronting that and dealing with it and knowing that that was burnout symptoms I was experiencing, I just kept pushing through it. So I replaced my opiate addiction with a work addiction. And then a work addiction, I also adopted a stimulant addiction. So I started taking some Adderall, some Vyvanse, some caffeine, just to keep being able to go, because I was so scared that without my work, I wasn't anything. I didn't really have any value. And eventually, that all ran out. So when I was 25 years old, I was standing in the store one day of one of the stores that I was working at, and I collapsed on the floor and had to be hospitalized due to exhaustion. I was so mentally, physically, and spiritually drained that I literally like passed out on the floor, and I had to end up putting a month notice into my job. And when I had to put in my notice in my job, my entire sense of self went with it. And literally I lost everything at the same time. I lost my job, I lost the relationship that I was in, I even lost my apartment because I couldn't afford to, like, I literally physically couldn't work. This is at 25 years old. I couldn't physically work. And even at my lowest point, if I'm being really vulnerable with you guys, I didn't want to be here anymore. And before I followed through with that, I heard a voice in my head, and this is the voice that changed everything for me, and this is what helped with putting me on the path I am on now. That voice said, do not end your life before you know what it's like to really live it. And I realized in that moment that I didn't want to leave this earth. I just never really learned how to actually live. I spent my whole life surviving, trying to fit myself in boxes I wasn't meant to fit into, trying to live out values that weren't mine, and we'll get into that. So what did I do? Well, I had to figure out after that happened, why? Why was somebody who was ambitious as me and high achieving as me, why did I chase so much success and then I was left with nothing? I was left miserable. And I started to learn something really important, that there's a difference between fulfillment and success. And I realized that I didn't know how to prioritize my own personal fulfillment, because fulfillment comes from becoming the person that you're meant to be. And success comes from what you achieve in the process. You can't have one sustainably without the other. Fulfillment is what makes success sustainable. And so I went on a mission. I was like, how do I help the person I used to be? How do I help people with building and prioritizing their personal well-being without sacrificing their professional growth? And that's what birthed my company, Build Your Power. So I tell you guys that story because when I say I've been there and done that, I have. And we live in a culture that glorifies hustle and grind. We live in a culture that says that if we are not willing to abandon ourselves for the sake of the mission, then we're not going to be successful. And excuse my French, but that's bullshit. You can have both. And my goal today is to help teach you guys how to have both. So question for you guys real quick as we're going into the meat and potatoes here. How many of you guys have recently had a conversation with somebody and then felt like you wanted to take a nap after? You can be honest, it's okay. Maybe it's somebody in this room, but we won't talk about that, right? No, so and now how many of you guys have felt like after you talk to somebody, it's almost like they gave you life, like you felt energized, like you felt really good? How many of you guys have done, let's say your friend loves to do something. Let's say your friend loves, an example, knitting or something, for example, right? And it lights her up. It's really, really energizing for her. And she tricks you into trying it in some way, forces you to try it, and then you try it, and you're like, this is awful. I feel terrible. I feel really drained after doing this thing. Why do you like this, right? So, and then maybe opposite, right? You do something that energizes you, somebody else tries it and it doesn't energize them. My question is, what do you guys think is the difference between talking to people or doing things that give us life versus talking to people and doing things that take life away? Does anybody have an idea? Would love some insight, some participation. So what's the difference between the things that give you life and the things that take your life away? Energy suckers, so energy vampires, maybe, that term, if you guys have heard it. So how do those people behave and talk to you usually? Do they can you tell they're not listening to you maybe? You can tell they don't really care about what you're saying. What's that? Negativity. It's everybody just there's trauma dumping on you every time you hang out with them. It's 50,000 things going on and wow, that conversation was so great. And you're like, yeah, I didn't say anything, but it was amazing, right? So the way that I classify what that thing is, that thing that takes life away, right? The person or the thing that we're doing, what I call that, and this is the first root cause, is misalignment. So we all have a set of values internally, right? And I'm sure you guys have heard of core values of a company, right? And we also have personal core values as well. And what happens is it's either we consciously decide our own values or they're given to us by society, by our parents, by our friends. So whoever we are presenting ourselves to be, whether that's somebody who we really are or not, that's defined by the values that we're living out. And you know what one of the most exhausting things on the planet, one of the most exhausting things is? Forcing yourself to live out values that aren't yours. Forcing yourself to be somebody you're not is another way to put that. And the way that shows up, linking it back to the symptoms we were talking about, feeling disconnected from friends and family, it's a big sign that maybe I'm not doing things throughout the day that light me up. I can't be present, right? Waking up tired, even after 8 hours of sleep. So that emotional exhaustion, it's deeper than just I'm physically tired, right? It's not I hit a workout and I feel tired. No, it's deeper. It's mentally, spiritually, I feel like I'm completely drained, right? That comes from consistently doing things in our life that contradict what we value. And the areas of life that we practice our values the most are the areas that we tend to feel the most energized in, whether we're conscious of it or not. And the areas we practice those values the least are the areas we typically feel the most drained in. A lot of examples to that. So just to reiterate the why, you're emotionally exhausted because you're putting energy into things that drain you instead of things that energize you. So there's actually statistics that back this up too. So 79% of purpose-driven professionals cite exhaustion as their number one challenge, often due to a disconnect between personal values and daily responsibilities, which means that if I don't do things throughout the day that are either in alignment with my values or I don't do those things in a way that's in alignment with my values, I'm gonna get tired. I'm gonna feel exhausted. I'm gonna feel drained. So what I want you guys to do is another mental, don't worry, I'm not gonna have you guys write anything down today unless you want to. I want you guys to identify what is one core value, what is one thing that you feel like you value most in life? Not things that you think you should value, like what you think sounds good, but things that like to your core are really valuable to you. And then I want you to ask the question, does what I'm doing throughout the day right now reflect that value? Another good way to think about this is, let's say that something really frustrates you throughout the day. Let's say that my friend blows me off when we made plans, and that really just like bothers me. That really gets under my skin, right? I'm super angry at that. That's probably because you value honesty, or it's probably because you value commitment, right? It's probably because you value something that now anger and frustration is a sign of violation of values in some capacity. Right? So I want you guys to do that mentally for a second. Here's some examples if you guys want to look at it. I made that list myself. So yeah, that's the first main root cause of burnout. So it's the misalignment, right? So it's not necessarily about what we're doing. It's about, is that thing that you're doing true to you? Next thing I want to talk about is, how many of you guys have ever wanted to check your bank account but felt scared to? You just called yourself out there a little bit. Yeah. So how many of you guys like feel like there's like this list in your head of things that you've been putting off for months, maybe even years, right? For me, it was years sometimes. And every single time you think about that thing, you just like feel this pit in your stomach. Right? You kind of feel like, you feel like it's kind of controlling you in a way. So think about a computer too, right? So if a computer has 100 tabs open versus a computer that has one tab open, what computer is going to be draining the most battery, do you think? The one with 100 tabs open or the one with one tab open? 100 tabs, right? So every single time we avoid doing stuff, that's a little bit more of the mental energy that's being drained. Even if consciously we're not looking at it, right? Because like on the computer, you have the tab that's open, you have the tabs in the background, right? Even if you are focused on this tab, if you have a ton of tabs open in the background, it's going to be extremely draining for you. So what does that mean? What I call that is lack of clarity. Not allowing yourself to see what you need to do, which causes us to procrastinate on doing it, right? Because when you guys are not checking your bank account, what's the feeling that you're avoiding when you check that bank account? Disappointment. Fear, maybe too. Anybody else have any ideas? What's the feeling that you're avoiding whenever you know things you need to do, but you're not doing them? Accountability, right? So it's almost like we're not being honest with ourselves. Right? And because what does that do for us? Well, if we're not honest with ourselves, then we don't actually have to hold ourselves accountable to making the changes that we know we need to make. So we are masters of avoidance as human beings. And one of the main ways that we avoid things? Working. There's an addiction to that, right? There's an addiction to avoiding things through overworking ourselves. And we tell ourselves it's because we're really disciplined, and we tell ourselves it's because we're just like high achievers. I don't really think that we procrastinate because we're lazy. I personally don't think laziness exists. I think we procrastinate because we're scared. We're scared of confronting the things that we're putting off. And some of the symptoms that drive, the lack of clarity drives here, is you keep telling yourself, I'll slow down when, but when never comes. Because what happens when you slow down? Some stuff that has been suppressed starts bubbling up, right? And if we don't learn how to embrace those emotions, then we're going to keep avoiding them. And then you're always busy, but you feel like it's never enough, right? Because if everything seems important, if you don't know what a good life looks like outside of work, you'll never know when to stop, right? So you never do. So if we use work as a form of, ooh, that was good, see that? If you use work as a form of avoidance, then that's because there's things in your personal life that you don't like, that you want to address, but you're scared to address, right? And this is something I also want you guys, this is probably something you'd want to write down or just really keep it in your mind here. What you avoid controls you. So that call you're not making, it controls you. The bank account you're not checking, it controls you. The workout that you're skipping, it controls you. Every single time we don't confront the things that our heart's telling us that we need to do, it drains our energy more. And then what do? We reinforce this belief maybe that we have that we're not good enough in some capacity, or I don't deserve what I want in some capacity. So that's how you self-sabotage, right? Is by not confronting the things and doing the things that you know you want. Because if we do that, again, we have to be honest with ourselves, right? So there are some statistics with this, is individuals with clearly defined goals experience 50% higher levels of happiness and life satisfaction. So clarity literally raises satisfaction and happiness. We just got to get through all the uncomfortable emotions before we can kind of get to the goal of that, right? So, yeah, we're going to go to the next one. That was a great transition. Goals outside of work. So I want you guys to ask yourself real quick, if money was no object and I had total time freedom, what would I want my life to look like? And you guys can think about this maybe in the perspective of personal areas of life. And these are what I consider personal areas of life. So we got spirituality, whether that is like belief in God, whether that's even just like a sense of higher purpose, even peace, right? Having inner peace, that in my perspective, that's also spiritual. We got family life, so my spouse, your kids, what life is like at home, people you consider family, social life, community, you know, all that good stuff. Mental health, right? The voice in your head, the inner critic, right? Are you letting that voice control you, or do you understand that that's not you? Is your mind working for you or against you? And then physical health, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? Are you prioritizing your own personal well-being in that way? So really ask yourself, what do I want in these areas, or one of these areas? And if you have a hard time coming up with that, that's normal. Just ask yourself what you don't want. Whatever the opposite of that is what you do want. So that's a cool trick. All right, let's talk about one of the last, this is going to be the last like root cause of burnout that I've identified and I've seen. So let's talk about like things that we do throughout the day, right? So there's things that we do throughout the day that energize us, like I said, and things we do throughout the day that drain us. Have any of you guys had a day where you did a bunch of stuff, and then at the end of the day, you were like really frustrated and felt like you didn't get anything done? Like you were really busy, like on your calendar, you just had a ton of appointments and you were in motion constantly, but at the end of the day, you just feel really frustrated and you're just like, man, like today kind of sucked. When's the last time you guys had, or has anybody had one of those days, I guess? Yeah, Brennan, today's that day. It was yesterday, yeah. And then what about a day that's like equally as busy, but at the end of the day, you actually felt satisfied? You felt like, dang, like I really got a lot done today. I felt really accomplished. Have you guys experienced that too? So what's the difference, right, between the days that we do a lot of stuff and we feel super dissatisfied and frustrated, and then the days that we do a lot of stuff and we feel really energized and fulfilled and satisfied? It's like that good tired. Does anybody have any idea about what the difference is between those 2 days?
Doing things with what your values and morals align with.
Yeah, doing things that your values and morals align with, absolutely. So maybe we're, in a sense, prioritizing those things, maybe not consciously, but we're prioritizing those things. Yeah, so really what we call that is struggling to prioritize. And this is really important. So there's a huge difference between time management and prioritization. Time management means I'm going to take what I'm already doing and make things more efficient. So I'm going to make what I'm already doing better. And then there's another side of it where prioritization, which is I'm going to make sure what I'm doing is actually important to me to begin with. A lot of people think they have a time management problem, but they don't. They have a prioritization problem. And the question I ask people is, well, how do you know what to prioritize if you don't know what you want? How do you know what to prioritize if you don't know what you value? How are you supposed to say no to people and no to things if you don't have a reason to say yes to something else? So how many people here struggle with saying no and overcommitting their time and kind of people-pleasing in that way? right? So yeah, it's because we're not really clear on why we're saying no. It's not because we don't know how to talk to people. It's just because maybe we're not creating enough importance for our personal value system, right? And those symptoms that you'll notice with struggling to prioritize is saying yes to clients who drain you, right? Slowing down feels like falling behind. And then you feel guilty anytime you're not working. So when everything feels urgent, you say yes to too much, and you feel guilty when you try to slow down. Because a lot of people think that, and that feeling of overwhelm, right? How many people are feeling overwhelmed today in any capacity? How many people feel overwhelmed at least once a week? Right? So that feeling of overwhelm, it doesn't come from because of how much is on our plate. It comes from a perceived lack of control. I'm going to say that again. Feeling overwhelmed is not about how many things you have on your plate. It's about a perceived lack of control, which means if I'm not consciously prioritizing things in my life, I'm going to feel like life is happening to me because I'm being reactive, because I'm not consciously making decisions to help create my life. I'm just trying to survive my life. And you can't build your life in survival mode. So overwhelm is not about how much you have on your plate. Sometimes it's like purely about how much you have on your plate. But most of the time, it's because we're not actually taking charge of the things that we know we can. 57% of leaders struggle with prioritizing tasks, leading to overcommitment and overwhelm. So, what we're going to do now is I want you guys to think about these root causes. Think about the misalignment, think about the lack of clarity, and think about the struggling to prioritize. I want you guys to pick one of these things that you maybe want to start addressing. So for misalignment, do I want to start consciously maybe embodying that value that I picked for myself? For lack of clarity, do I want to get clear on what an area of my life looks like outside of work? Struggling to prioritize, do I want to be able to create a list of the things in my life that actually give me energy, or create a list of the things that actually drain me, right? Make sure I'm putting that in the forefront. And then ask yourself, what is a small action that you can take this week to start addressing that root cause? Because just drinking more wine isn't going to help long term, right? Like working more is not going to help long term. Even if you are addicted to working out, like working out twice a day instead of once a day, right? It's not going to work long term. So I want you guys to really reflect on that. So as far as the present, how are we on time? Anybody got time? Oh, nailed it. Yeah, it's perfect. All right, cool. So with that being said, that's my presentation today. I need to work on my transitions, but I would love for you guys to take this survey real quick and give me some feedback on how I did. And then I got one more thing for you as well after you guys scan that and do this survey. And then just stare at me awkwardly when you're done. Is it working? That's good. I want to make sure. Sometimes the survey doesn't work. All right, as you guys are filling that out real quick, if this spoke to you, you don't have to admit it into the room, but I know the people that I help, they're the silent sufferers. They're the people that their whole life they've had to put on a mask because they learned at some point that other people's needs and desires are more important than their own. It's the people that are really good at acting like they're okay when they're not okay. If you saw at least 3 of the symptoms, if you resonate with at least 3 of those symptoms that we talked about in the beginning, and you're ready to start prioritizing your personal well-being, and you don't want to sacrifice your professional growth to have to do it like I did, then I invite you guys. This is exclusive to only people I do presentations for. I'd love to do a free consultation with you. I have 5 spots available for my coaching. And yeah, would love to talk to you about how I can help you. That is my time. You guys can clap now. Thank you so much. Also, you can come and see me after if you want to talk to me. So, and I want to leave room for questions because I think we have plenty of time, right?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Somebody that's struggling to prioritize, how do you coach them through that?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing is you have to understand what to prioritize. So step 1 is you have to get clear on what your values are. Step 2 is you have to get clear on what your vision is for your different areas of life. And that's going to be your guiding North Star. And then from there, then we can look at, okay, so what are the behaviors that I have right now that are taking me closer to that? And then what are the behaviors that are taking me further away from that? So it's kind of like doing like a habit audit, right? Kind of seeing what are we actually doing that's taking us further away or closer.
Maybe like with the values, how do you help someone to turn? Because like all of those words, like you can agree with in some form of fashion. So
Yeah.
How do you isolate those?
Yeah, so what happens, the first thing we'll do is like I have them pick every single thing that they resonate with, and we'll kind of do the process of elimination. Then I'll ask them the question, because when I ask about values, the first default people go to is how do I show up for others? And so then what I ask them is like, okay, out of these words, which of these values do you want to embody more for yourself? And that eliminates like 80% of them usually, because people think about how they can show up for others, but they don't think about how they can show up for themselves. So it's like the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated, but there's a really important piece that's missing. Treat yourself the way that you treat others.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Would love to hear too, like questions or takeaways, things that resonated with you guys. Would love to hear it. So.
Well, you were talking about a good day versus a bad day. So as real estate agents, our good day is anytime we're writing a contract or negotiating a contract, regardless of whatever else. I feel like we're all adrenaline junkies. Like we're popping, we're doing it. And then for me personally, anything having to do with paperwork, like the thought of mailers, I'd rather have a car accident at home. Like I just can't do it. So I hired somebody else who handles all of that because I don't want to do any of that. Like
Yeah.
personal notes, I'm good. A mailer, oh no, that's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
Anything Avery 5160.
What you avoid controls you, Shannon.
But to her point, she had the courage to delegate that because she realized it doesn't light her up, right?
Right.
So that's a huge. It's like why force if you have the liberty and the resources, you holding on to that for the sake of pride, is just like it's just making your life miserable for no reason.
Yeah.
So.
Crashing the car is exciting because then I get to go car shopping.
I was talking about
Yeah. No, I like getting a new car.
Crashing the car is exciting. Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah. Anybody else?
I think agents, all of us, we struggle with the good day, bad day.
Yeah.
And it seems like, is it all or nothing sometimes? Like it's either the treasury or selling.
Yeah, yeah. And one really important thing I want to mention to you guys too is when you think about burnout, to really simplify it, right? It's when the ratio of things in your life that drain you is greater than the ratio of things that energize you. So there's a lot of things you can't control as real estate agents, but there are a ton of things that you can control in your personal life. So what happens is instead of trying to focus on the things you can't control as real estate agents, learn how to fill your cup up in other areas of your life so you have the energy to deal with what you need to deal with as real estate agents, right? So it's always funny, like people tell me all the time, it's like, well, when I quit my job, everything will be better. I'm like, yeah, until you recreate the same cycles and patterns of behaviors in the next job. And then you're gonna keep job hopping. So it's more so about, am I prioritizing my personal fulfillment? It's not so much about the job or the external thing, it's about how do I make it work for me?
How do you help someone that's like looking for something that brings them that like energy in that sense?
Like looking for a job or like
Just like a hobby or just like
a hobby?
kind of like fulfillment outside of work.
Yeah, so the first thing I do is always think back to what are the things that you used to love to do as a kid. That's typically like one of the first things I help people lock in on. The second thing I have people do is what's called an energy audit, and you guys feel free to do this for yourself. So spending a day paying attention to the things that energize you versus the things that drain you. So if you go throughout the day, you write down on this side the things that drain you, you put a minus sign next to it. The things that energize you, you put a plus sign next to it. And what happens is if you do that enough, you're going to recognize some patterns. It's like, okay, well, maybe I don't like the mail writing stuff, but maybe if I do it in this way, it's a little bit more energizing, right? Or because a lot of times what happens is we feel guilty for prioritizing those things too. So another way I help them is there's deep-rooted, and I won't get too deep into this, but there's deep-rooted belief systems that we develop as we grow up that we don't choose. And what we believe to be true is what we look for. So if we have a belief that says doing things that bring me joy is not productive, for example, then we're not going to even give ourselves the opportunity to go find the things that light us up. So it's really helping people identify, do I have a belief that's blocking that view? And if so, what are the things? It's almost treating it like committing to a job. It's like, how am I going to commit to figuring out what lights me up, and what are the things I'm going to try to do so? Does that answer your question? Cool, yeah. I'm still a work in progress with that too. Like I've been playing guitar and singing. I haven't done that since I was like 13. So, it takes time for sure.
Guys, any other questions for Brennan?
Any other questions?
No, I think this is really good.
This is awesome, man. Thank you.
Thank you.